Earning your degree online doesn't mean you have to go about it alone. At Capella University, we're here to support you when you're ready. From enrollment counselors who get to know you and your goals, to academic coaches who can help you form a plan to stay on track. We care about your success and are dedicated to helping you pursue your goals. Going back to school is a big step, but having support at every step of your academic journey can make a big difference. Imagine your future differently at capella.edu.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Do you have a point of sale system you can trust, or is it a real POS? You need Shopify for retail. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify POS has everything you need to sell in person. Go to shopify.com/system, all lowercase, to take your retail business to the next level today. That's shopify.com/system.
Thanks for listening to the Red Treehouse, where I tell scary stories to keep you up at night. You can listen to the Red Treehouse on your favorite streaming platforms, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Be sure to follow, like, and subscribe. Oh, and leave a 5-star review. You can follow the Red Treehouse on social media, on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, X, Threads, and Facebook at Red Treehouse Pod. And now you can find the Red Treehouse on Patreon. Join the Red Treehouse community for as little as $3 per month and receive exclusive member benefits, including personal shoutouts, early access to episodes, bonus episodes, and more. Simply go to patreon.com/Red Treehouse. As always, if you have a scary story or topic you'd like me to feature on an upcoming episode, email redtreehousepod@gmail.com. Important note, sources for this episode can be found in the show notes. The Red Treehouse is dedicated to my dad. I love you, Pop. One of the most common questions I'm asked when people find out I host the Red Treehouse is, do you believe in ghosts? For me, the answer is pretty straightforward. Yes, I do. But lately, and you'll understand why in a moment, I've been asking myself, would you want to come back as a ghost? And for me, that answer is not as straightforward. I'm not sure. What about you? If you believe in ghosts, would you want to come back as one? If you answered no, let me ask a follow-up question. If your death was the result of a violent crime, would you want to come back as a ghost if it meant you could solve your own murder? The question sounds outrageous, but it's really at the core of the story of Teresita Basa, a woman who in the 1970s was the victim of a horrifying and violent crime. After months of investigating leads, the trail went cold, until Teresita's spirit showed up and helped solve her own murder. That sentence sounds outrageous, but it seems that's exactly what happened. In this episode of the Red Treehouse, we're going to explore the tragic and mystifying case of Teresita Basa. Did her spirit really come back from the grave to solve her own murder? Or was there a more natural and insidious explanation? I'll share the story. You decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Welcome to the Red Treehouse.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Do you have a point of sale system you can trust, or is it a real POS? You need Shopify for retail. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify POS has everything you need to sell in person. Go to shopify.com/system, all lowercase, to take your retail business to the next level today. That's shopify.com/system.
Teresita Basa was born in 1929 in the city of Dumaguete, Philippines, to parents Pedro and Socorro Basa, successful business owners who doted on their only child. Growing up, it is said Teresita was smart and had a passion for music from when she was young. Teresita loved playing the piano and listening to her parents' vinyl records, and it started a lifelong obsession with music. When Teresita was a teenager, World War II closed in on her doorstep when Japan invaded the Philippines in 1942. All of a sudden, life changed drastically. After completing her secondary education, Teresita moved to Manila, where she studied music at the University of Assumption. And after graduation, she moved to London to pursue a graduate degree and continue her pursuit of a music career. Within 2 years, Teresita completed her studies and toured Europe with several close friends. And in a short time, a mentor encouraged her to pursue her music career in the United States. In 1957, when Teresita was 28 years old, she moved to Bloomington, Indiana, before eventually moving to Washington, D.C., where she worked as a typist. While there, she struck up a romance with Edward O'Meara, a lobbyist. But in 1965, Teresita was forced to move back to the Philippines after her work visa expired. Edward visited from time to time, but the relationship ended when Teresita's father, Pedro, discovered Edward at one of the local brothels. For the next few years, Teresita taught piano in Dumaguete, though eventually she returned to the United States. In 1971, when Teresita was 42 years old, she moved to Chicago, Illinois, and with the help of the consulate, and found an apartment on Mozart Street. She also returned to working as a typist and pursued both music education and a music career. But at that point, Teresita recognized the difficulty of trying to break into the music industry. So she switched career paths and enrolled in the respiratory therapy program at a local community college. She graduated 2 years later and began working as a respiratory therapist at Edgewater Hospital in Chicago. By now, life was improving dramatically for Teresita. A great job with better pay, a blossoming social life, and a bigger apartment. She moved from Mozart Street to the Pine Grove apartment building, where she lived on the 15th floor. With more space, Teresita purchased an electric organ and started a music band with a few co-workers and her cousin. The band was named Mahogany 5+1. Mahogany 5+1 played shows across the area, and Teresita enjoyed hosting her friends for small gatherings and parties. At this point, Teresita was content with her career and social life, and did not have any romantic interests. In 1975, Teresita received a letter from Robert Krause, an old pen pal, letting her know he would be in town and that he would like to take her out to dinner. Teresita agreed, but only on one condition. She wanted 2 friends to join them. It's not known if Teresita brought them for safety or to not send mixed signals. Either way, the four went out to dinner and had an enjoyable time. Sometime in early 1977, Mahogany 5+1 was undergoing a change in the group. The band's drummer was likely going to leave the band, leaving Teresita worried because they had an upcoming show. On February 21, 1977, Teresita was getting ready to leave Edgewater Hospital after completing her shift when she was approached by her friend, Alan Showery. The two caught the bus as they lived near each other, and while en route, Teresita mentioned two seemingly insignificant details. First, her television wasn't working, and second, her band, Mahogany 5+1, was likely going to need a new drummer. After sharing this, Alan Showery told Teresita that he was a bit of a handyman, and he offered to come by her apartment later that evening to look at her television set. And he mentioned that he was a drummer and offered to fill in for Mahogany 5+1. Her anxiety eased. Teresita invited Alan to come to one of their live shows to hear their style of music and see if he would be a good fit to fill in for the band. Alan expressed interest, but commented that he likely couldn't afford a ticket as money was tight. Teresita told him not to worry and offered to get him a ticket, which he could pick up later that evening when he came by to look at the television set. The two then split up, with each going to their apartment. The timeline from here is important.
Looking to invest? Start your journey by exploring exchange-traded funds with Global X ETFs. Exchange-traded funds, or ETFs for short, create baskets of stocks, bonds, and other assets that you can buy in a single trade. Global X specializes in ETFs that track emerging trends, like the rise of artificial intelligence, as well as strategies aimed to generate income potential. Visit globalxetfs.com to discover how you can get started.
Sometime around 7 p.m., Teresita called her friend and fellow Mahogany 5+1 bandmate, Dr. John Abella. She mentioned to him the possibility of Alan filling in as a drummer. Dr. Abella and Alan were familiar with each other from their work together at the hospital. The conversation lasted about 10 minutes before the two hung up. A short time later, around 7:30 p.m., Teresita's close friend, Ruth Loeb, called her, and they spoke for about 20 minutes before Teresita mentioned having a male friend coming over shortly. The two then hung up. Sometime around 8:40 p.m., Teresita's neighbors noticed a burning smell, and thinking it was coming from inside their apartment, checked to make sure the stove and oven were both turned off. Realizing the smell was coming from outside their apartment, the two investigated the hallway and found smoke quickly filling the area. The neighbors, Catherine and Madrid Nas, scrambled to alert others to the smoke, contacted maintenance about the fire, and called the fire department. When firefighters arrived, they discovered the smoke was coming from Teresita's apartment, and upon entering, noticed the place was a mess. They also took note of something unusual. The smoke was coming from a fire in the living room, and it appeared someone had placed a mattress on the floor and set it on fire. Then, they noticed something else. A human leg sticking out from underneath the mattress. When firefighters moved the mattress, they found the body of Teresita Basa. A content warning before we continue. The following contains graphic descriptions of assault and murder. Listener discretion is advised. Upon finding her body, firefighters discovered a gruesome crime scene. Teresita was naked and had been stabbed in the chest with a large kitchen knife. The mattress was then placed on top of her and set ablaze. Initially, it appeared Teresita had been raped, murdered, and set on fire. Investigators were quickly called to the scene, and it was determined some of the debris underneath the mattress had protected Teresita's body from being engulfed in the flames. The scene seemed odd, and detectives realized the locks on Teresita's front door were unbroken, indicating whoever murdered Teresita didn't force their way into the apartment and likely knew her. Evidence at the crime scene indicated Teresita was the victim of rape, but they would have to wait until the autopsy to know for sure. While looking around her apartment, they found one piece of evidence: a cryptic note that read, "Get theater tickets for AS." Teresita's autopsy revealed more than was initially thought. Though the mattress and clothing prevented Teresita from being overtaken by the fire, she did suffer burns to her arms and head, and the medical examiner discovered, quote, that beneath the charred skin of her neck, there was evidence of blood pooling near her throat and fractured larynx, end quote. This led investigators to believe Teresita was strangled, then stabbed, before being set on fire. The ME also determined something else, something important. Teresita was not sexually assaulted, and the crime scene had been staged as if she was, to throw off investigators. In the days and weeks following Teresita's murder, investigators reached out to her family and friends, hoping someone could identify a person of interest, or at the very least, AS. But no matter how hard they worked, every lead became a dead end. Teresita had no enemies, and by all accounts was loved by friends, family, and co-workers alike. And before long, the case quickly turned cold. Every lead evaporated. In the months following Teresita's death, Remibusa Chua, who went by the nickname Remy, experienced deep grief over her murder. Though the two were co-workers, they were not close and did not socialize outside of work. So it struck everyone as odd that she was so affected. Except Remy's behavior bordered on obsession. In July 1977, Remy was sitting in the break room at the hospital, and as a few co-workers made their way to the room, she quickly stormed out. When the others peeked into the room, there was no one there, and no reason for Remy to have run out so quickly. That night, Remy told her husband, Dr. Jose Chua, a surgeon at Edgewater Hospital, what happened in the break room. She explained that when she was sitting in the room, she closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, she saw the ghost of Teresita Basa standing right before her eyes. This was strange for sure. But there was something even more strange. After witnessing Teresita's ghost, Remy's behavior seemed to change dramatically. She spoke about Teresita constantly, revealed personal and intimate details of her life, hosted parties, and socialized more often. All of these behaviors seemed to mimic Teresita's, which upset Remy's co-workers, in part because Remy, by nature, was the opposite of the way she'd been behaving. The situation came to a head when Remy complained of a hostile work environment and was subsequently fired for insubordination. Sometime after, while at home, Remy complained of extreme fatigue and headed back to the bedroom. A short time later, Jose went back to check on her and found her in bed, laying on her back and staring straight up at the ceiling. He asked if she was okay, but got no response. He asked again, but again, Remy didn't say anything. Then, Remy spoke, first in English, then in Tagalog, the native language of the Philippines. She said, "Mama, are you there?" Jose was confused by what was happening, especially since the voice coming out of Remy did not belong to her. He asked her, "Who are you?" Then Remy, still staring at the ceiling, said to her husband, "I am Teresita Basa." After saying this, she turned to face Jose and said, "Dr. Chua, I would like to ask for your help. The man who murdered me is still at large." A few minutes later, Remy came out of her trance, completely unaware of what had just happened. A few weeks later, Remy was having a conversation on the phone when she suddenly thrust it into Jose's hand and told him she was going back to the bedroom. Jose took the phone and informed the caller Remy would have to call them back. He then went to the bedroom, where again he found Remy in a trance-like state, lying on her back on the bed, eyes wide open, staring straight up at the ceiling. Like before, the voice identified itself as Teresita Basa. And like before, it was not Remy's natural voice. And this time, the voice claimed to know who killed her: Alan Showery. The Chuas were uncertain about what to do. It seemed impossible for them to walk into a police station, share the information about Alan Showery, and tell detectives Remy had been possessed by Teresita's spirit. So for the time being, they kept the information to themselves. Until Teresita appeared again. This time, telling Jose that Alan had robbed her home. One article stated, quote, "Showery had stolen Teresita's jewelry on the night he murdered her and had given it to his girlfriend. Even better, it was very easily identifiable jewelry. Teresita's father had bought that specific jewelry for her mother, a lovely gift from France. Teresita's mother, in turn, had given it to her daughter. There were family members who were well aware of the jewelry and its provenance, and Teresita Remy gave very precise information on names and contact information of the family members who would be able to identify those pieces." End quote. And there was something else. Teresita Remy disclosed she had not been sexually assaulted, a detail kept from the public. With this new information, the Chuas reached out to police by way of the Philippine consulate. The lead detective, Joseph Stacula, listened as the Chuas shared their bizarre and mystifying story. The connection between the note in Teresita's apartment and the now person of interest, Alan Showery, had been made. And their interest was piqued further when they discovered Showery had prior convictions for robbery and sexual assault. An important detail: Not only did the Chuas tell Detective Stakula Alan Showery's name and that he had robbed Teresita of her jewelry, but they also told him that Teresita was not sexually assaulted. This information convinced Detective Stakula that the Chuas were telling the truth. Police questioned Alan Showery, who denied going to Teresita's apartment and claimed he'd been home with his girlfriend at the time of her murder. They took him to the police station for further questioning and revealed they knew he was supposed to go to Teresita's apartment to fix her television. Then, Alan Showery's story changed. He admitted going to Teresita's apartment to look at her TV set, but stated he didn't fix it because it was beyond his ability as a handyman. He then claimed he left quickly and returned home to work on a few electrical problems at his house. With Showery now claiming a new alibi, police questioned his girlfriend Yanka, who denied they had electrical problems and refuted Alan's claims. Sensing Yanka would be helpful, they asked if Alan had given her any jewelry, and she acknowledged he'd given her jewelry in February as a late Christmas gift. February, the same month Teresita had been robbed and murdered. Police had her bring the jewelry to the police station, where Teresita's relatives confirmed they were the same pieces stolen from her apartment the night she was murdered. Confronted with this, Alan Showery's story changed again. This time, he confessed to killing Teresita. According to Showery, he went to Teresita's apartment and planned to rob her. He'd fallen behind on his bills and was struggling financially, so he planned a robbery under the guise of helping her fix her television. As soon as Teresita let him in and closed the door, he strangled and stabbed her before staging the scene to look as though the crime was sexually motivated. Then, convinced Teresita had money, he searched the apartment for cash. He took the jewelry and $30. After initially confessing, Alan Showery eventually withdrew it, entering a not guilty plea and forcing a trial by jury. As both sides prepared, accusations against the Chuas came to the forefront. Remy was accused of being a fraud and faking the trances and possession, quote, because she had been fired from the hospital, end quote. There were also some who believed Remy may have had something to do with the murder and came forward only after fighting a guilty conscience. Her story seemed too perfect and tidy. They believed she knew too much to have not been involved. After both sides rested their case, the jury went into deliberations, and they spent hours going back and forth before declaring a hung jury. The jury was divided. They could not find Alan Showery guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. A second trial was scheduled, but sometime between the end of the first trial and the start of the second trial, Alan Showery pled guilty to the murder of Teresita Basa. He was sentenced to 14 years in prison, but only served 4 years before being released on parole in 1983. To this day, no one is sure what compelled Alan Showery to change his plea, though some believe Teresita Basa haunted him while he was in custody. Remy Chua never had a visitation from Teresita Basa again. I'll admit, this case intrigues and creeps me the hell out. I first heard about it a few weeks back during a late-night painting of my bedroom. I was upstairs, alone in the house with the dogs, and I had to run downstairs to make sure the doors were locked and the lights were on. I don't get creeped out by much, but this one had me looking over my shoulder repeatedly. And of course, I knew it was a perfect story for the Red Treehouse. I'm still not sure what to think about it. I truly believe in possession and don't doubt the Chua's experience. But man, this case is just so outside a normal case of possession. And though this isn't a case of malevolent demonic possession, it's no less scary. At the start, I asked if you would want to come back as a ghost. I think if I was the victim of a violent crime, I would want to come back and do exactly what Teresita Basa appeared to have done. What about you? As we close this episode of the Red Treehouse, we're left with these lingering questions. Did her spirit really come back from the grave to solve her own murder? Or was there a more natural and insidious explanation? I've shared the story. Now you decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Thanks for joining me in the Red Treehouse.